I overheard my in-laws planning to contest my husband's will before he even passed away from his terminal illness. I'm 34F and I'm writing this from the hospital where my husband Connor is in hospice care. He has stage 4 pancreatic cancer and his doctors say he has maybe 2 weeks left. We've been married for 6 years and together for 9. What I'm about to share is so horrific that I'm still processing it. 3 days ago I overheard my in-laws plotting to contest Connor's will the moment he dies. They were standing in the hospital hallway outside his room discussing it like they were planning a vacation. I need to document this because I know what's coming and I need people to understand that I'm not crazy, that this is really happening. Connor was diagnosed 14 months ago. He started having severe abdominal pain and jaundice. We went to the ER and after a CT scan and biopsy they told us it was pancreatic cancer, stage 4, already metastasized to his liver. The oncologist said the 5-year survival rate was 3%, that we should focus on quality of life and getting his affairs in order. Connor took it better than I did. He's always been pragmatic. He said he wanted to fight it but he also wanted to be realistic. We did 6 months of chemotherapy. It was brutal. Connor lost 40 pounds. He was nauseous constantly. His hair fell out. He was exhausted all the time. The chemo didn't work. The tumors kept growing. 4 months ago his oncologist said there were no more treatment options, that we should consider hospice. Connor decided he wanted to spend his remaining time at home with me and our dog Bailey. We set up hospice care. Nurses came 3 times a week. We had a hospital bed delivered to our living room. For 3 months Connor was relatively stable. He was weak and in pain but he could still talk. He could still watch TV. We could still have conversations. My in-laws are Connor's parents Dennis and Lorraine. They live about 40 minutes away in Plano. Dennis is a retired electrical engineer. Lorraine was a school administrator. They're both in their late 60s. Connor also has a younger brother named Trevor who's 29. He works in sales and lives in Fort Worth. When Connor was first diagnosed his parents were supportive. They visited regularly. Lorraine would bring meals. Dennis would sit with Connor and watch sports. But over the past few months their behavior changed. They started asking a lot of questions about our finances, about Connor's life insurance, about our house, about his retirement accounts. Connor and I own our home in McKinney. It's worth about $400,000. We have a mortgage but there's significant equity. Connor also has a 401k with about $200,000 in it and a life insurance policy through his work for $500,000. When you add it all up plus some savings we have it's close to $1 million in total assets. I make decent money as a dental hygienist, about $60,000 a year, but Connor was a software engineer and made significantly more. He was the primary breadwinner. About 5 months ago Connor updated his will. He worked with an estate planning attorney named Richard Vasquez. The will leaves everything to me, the house, the retirement accounts, the life insurance, everything. He also designated me as the beneficiary on all his accounts and policies. This is standard for married couples. Richard told us that Texas is a community property state and that I'd inherit most of it anyway, but having it clear will prevent any confusion. Connor told his parents that he'd updated his will and that everything was in order. Lorraine asked him directly who the beneficiary was. Connor said it was me, that he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. She got quiet and then said she understood. But apparently she didn't understand or didn't accept it. 2 weeks ago Connor's condition deteriorated rapidly. He started having trouble breathing. He was in severe pain even with morphine. He couldn't eat. His hospice nurse said it was time to move him to an inpatient hospice facility where they could manage his symptoms better. We transferred him to a hospice center in Richardson. He's been here for 12 days. The doctors say he's in the final stage, that his organs are starting to shut down, that it could be days or weeks but not months. I've been here around the clock. I sleep in a recliner next to his bed. I hold his hand. I talk to him even though he's mostly unconscious now. Dennis and Lorraine have been visiting every day. Trevor comes every few days. 3 days ago I went down to the cafeteria to get coffee. It was around 2 in the afternoon. When I came back I heard voices in the hallway outside Connor's room. I recognized Dennis and Lorraine's voices. I was about to round the corner when I heard Lorraine say something that made me freeze. She said once Connor passes we need to move quickly to contest the will, that we can't let her walk away with everything. Her, meaning me. I stood there hidden around the corner and listened. Dennis said they should wait until after the funeral to file anything, that it would look bad if they moved too fast. Lorraine said no, that they needed to file within a few days, that the longer they waited the harder it would be. Trevor's voice joined in. He said he'd already talked to a lawyer, that the lawyer said they had grounds to contest based on undue influence. Undue influence, meaning they were going to claim I manipulated Connor into leaving me everything. Lorraine said that's exactly right, that they'd argue I isolated Connor from his family during his illness and pressured him into changing his will. None of that is true. Connor made his own decisions. I never isolated him. His family visited constantly. Dennis said they should also claim that Connor wasn't mentally competent when he signed the will, that the cancer had affected his cognition. Again, completely false. Connor was sharp until the last few weeks. Richard, the estate attorney, had specifically evaluated Connor's mental capacity before drafting the will. Trevor said the lawyer told him that even if they didn't win the contest, they could tie up the estate for months or years, that I wouldn't be able to access any of the money or sell the house. Lorraine said good, that I didn't deserve a dime, that I'd only been married to Connor for 6 years and they'd been his parents for 36 years. She said I was probably already planning to move on and find someone new, that I'd use Connor's money to fund my new life. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Dennis said they needed to be strategic, that they should document every interaction with me from now on, that they should look for evidence that I was keeping Connor from them or making decisions without consulting them. Trevor said he'd start recording conversations on his phone. They talked for another 5 minutes about logistics, about which attorney to use, about how to divide Connor's assets once they successfully contested the will. Then they went quiet and I heard footsteps. I ducked into a nearby patient room and waited until they walked past. My hands were shaking. I felt nauseous. I went back to Connor's room. He was sleeping, the morphine drip keeping him comfortable. Lorraine and Dennis were sitting in chairs on the opposite side of the bed. They smiled at me when I walked in. Lorraine asked if I was okay, if I needed anything. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell them I'd heard everything. But I didn't. I just said I was fine and sat down next to Connor. That evening after they left, I called Richard Vasquez, Connor's estate attorney. I told him what I'd overheard. He was quiet for a moment and then said this happens more often than people think, that families often fight over estates especially when there's significant money involved. He said the good news was that Connor's will was airtight, that he'd documented Connor's mental capacity thoroughly, that there were witnesses to the signing, that everything was done properly. He said a will contest based on undue influence or lack of capacity would be very difficult to prove given the evidence. But he also said that Trevor was right, that even a baseless contest could tie up the estate for 6 months to a year, that I wouldn't be able to access the accounts or sell the house during that time. He said I should document everything from this point forward, every interaction with the in-laws, every conversation, every text message. He also said I should consider talking to Connor about recording a video statement. The idea was that Connor could speak directly to camera about his wishes, about why he left everything to me, about his relationship with his parents. Richard said it wouldn't be legally binding but it could be powerful evidence if the will was contested. I didn't want to burden Connor with this. He's dying. He should be spending his final days in peace. But I also knew that if I didn't act now I'd regret it. The next day when Connor was having a brief lucid period I told him what I'd overheard. He closed his eyes and tears ran down his face. He said he wasn't surprised, that his mother had always been controlling about money, that she'd made comments over the years about him being too generous with me. He said he was so sorry I had to deal with this. I told him it wasn't his fault. He agreed to record a video statement. I used my phone. Connor sat up slightly in bed. I adjusted the camera angle. He spoke for about 4 minutes. He said his name, the date, that he was of sound mind despite his terminal illness. He said he'd chosen to leave all his assets to me because I was his wife and the person he loved most in the world. He said his parents and brother were important to him but that he wanted to ensure I was financially secure. He said no one had pressured or influenced him, that this was entirely his decision. He said if anyone contested his will they were going against his explicit wishes. His voice was weak but clear. You could tell he meant every word. After we finished recording, Connor held my hand and said I should be prepared for his family to make things difficult. He said I should protect myself, that I should get my own attorney if needed. He said he wished he could be here to defend me but that he trusted I'd be strong. That was 2 days ago. Since then Dennis, Lorraine and Trevor have continued visiting. They act completely normal, loving, and supportive. Lorraine hugs me. Dennis asks if I need coffee. Trevor makes small talk. It's surreal knowing what they're planning. I've been documenting everything like Richard suggested. I keep a journal of who visits when, what they say, any requests they make. Yesterday Lorraine asked if she could have Connor's wedding ring after he passes. I said I'd think about it. She also asked if I'd made funeral arrangements yet. I said Connor and I had discussed cremation. She said the family would prefer a burial, that they'd like him buried in the family plot. I said I'd follow Connor's wishes. She gave me a tight smile and said of course. This morning Connor's breathing changed. The nurse said he's transitioning, that it could be hours or days. I'm sitting here holding his hand watching him slip away while knowing that the moment he's gone his family is going to attack me. I'm going to lose my husband and then I'm going to have to fight to keep the home we built together. I'm exhausted and heartbroken and angry. I don't understand how people can be so cruel, how they can sit in a dying man's room pretending to grieve while planning to steal from his widow. Richard said I have a strong case, that the will is solid, that the video statement will help. But I'm terrified of what's coming. Update, 2 weeks later. Connor passed away 6 days after I wrote my original post. He died peacefully in his sleep early in the morning with me holding his hand. He was 36 years old. I'm updating because everything I feared has come true and it's somehow worse than I imagined. The morning Connor died, I called Dennis and Lorraine to tell them. They arrived at the hospice within an hour. Lorraine cried and hugged me. Dennis stood there looking blank. Trevor showed up about an hour later. We sat with Connor's body for a while. The hospice staff was respectful and gave us space. Eventually the funeral home came to transport his body. I'd already made arrangements for cremation per Connor's wishes. Lorraine asked again about burial. I said Connor had been very clear that he wanted to be cremated. She said they'd discuss it as a family and let me know. I said there was nothing to discuss, that I was Connor's wife and I'd be following his instructions. Her expression hardened, but she didn't argue. That afternoon I went home for the first time in almost 2 weeks. The house felt empty and wrong without Connor. Bailey, our golden retriever, was staying with my sister. I couldn't handle taking care of her yet. I spent the next 3 days in a fog making phone calls, notifying Connor's employer, his insurance company, his bank. I also finalized the funeral arrangements. We planned a memorial service for the following Saturday. Dennis and Lorraine called several times asking about the service details, who was invited, who would speak. I told them it would be a small service, immediate family, and close friends. Lorraine said she wanted to do a reading. I said that would be fine. On Friday, 4 days after Connor died, a process server showed up at my door. I was served with legal papers. Dennis and Lorraine were contesting the will. The petition claimed that I had exercised undue influence over Connor during his illness, that I had isolated him from his family, and that Connor lacked mental capacity when he executed his will 5 months prior. They were asking the court to invalidate the will and distribute Connor's estate according to Texas intestacy laws, which would give me half and them half. I called Richard immediately. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. He said he'd expected this but was surprised they moved so quickly. He said filing the day before the funeral was aggressive and would not look good to a judge. He told me not to respond to any communication from them without running it through him first. The memorial service the next day was a nightmare. About 40 people came, friends from Connor's work, neighbors, college friends, my family, Connor's extended family. Dennis and Lorraine arrived with Trevor and several relatives I'd never met. During the service Lorraine did her reading. She chose a passage about family bonds and eternal love. Then she went off script. She started talking about how Connor had always been a devoted son, how family meant everything to him, how he'd want his legacy to support the people who raised him. It was a clear message directed at me. After the service during the reception at our house, several of Connor's relatives approached me. One aunt asked if I was planning to sell the house. Another uncle asked about Connor's retirement accounts. I realized Dennis and Lorraine had been talking to people, planting seeds. Then Lorraine pulled me aside and said we needed to talk. She said the will contest wasn't personal, that they just wanted what was fair. She said Connor would want his parents taken care of, that 6 years of marriage didn't entitle me to everything he'd worked for. I said Connor made his wishes clear, that he wanted me to have everything. She said Connor wasn't thinking clearly at the end, that the cancer had affected his judgment. I said he was completely lucid when he made his will, that his attorney had documented his capacity. She said we'd let the court decide. Then she asked if I'd be willing to settle, to avoid the expense and stress of litigation. She suggested I keep the house and they'd take the retirement accounts and life insurance. I said no, that Connor's will was clear and I intended to honor it. She said I was being selfish, that I was disrespecting Connor's memory. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. The next week was consumed with legal proceedings. Richard filed a response to the will contest denying all their claims. He submitted the video Connor had recorded as evidence of his testamentary capacity and intent. He also submitted documentation from Connor's oncologist stating that Connor's cognitive function was unimpaired until the final 2 weeks of his life, well after the will was executed. Dennis and Lorraine's attorney filed a motion to freeze the estate assets. The judge granted a temporary freeze until the contest could be heard. This meant I couldn't access Connor's 401k or life insurance. I couldn't refinance the house or sell it. The only money I had access to was my own salary and our joint checking account, which had about $8,000 in it. Richard said the hearing on the will contest wouldn't happen for at least 4 months, possibly longer. In the meantime I was stuck. I still had to pay the mortgage, utilities, all the bills Connor and I had shared. My salary covers the basics but not comfortably. We'd been living on 2 incomes. I also had significant medical bills from Connor's treatment. Even with insurance we owed about $15,000 to various providers. I couldn't pay them without access to Connor's life insurance. Richard said I could ask the court for an allowance from the estate to cover expenses, but that would require another hearing and more legal fees. I started picking up extra shifts at the dental office, working Saturdays, staying late. My coworkers were sympathetic. They knew Connor had just died, but I couldn't explain what was really going on. 2 weeks after the funeral I got a letter from Dennis and Lorraine's attorney. It was a formal settlement offer. They proposed that I would receive the house plus $100,000. They would receive the 401k and life insurance. The math didn't work in my favor. The house has a mortgage of $200,000, so my equity is about $200,000, plus $100,000 in cash would give me $300,000 total. They'd be getting $700,000. It was insulting. Richard said it was a lowball offer designed to pressure me, that they knew I was financially strained. He advised me to reject it. I did. Their attorney responded saying I was being unreasonable, that I should think carefully about the cost of litigation. The following week things escalated. I started receiving friend requests on social media from people I didn't know. I looked at their profiles and realized they were friends of Dennis and Lorraine. Several people left comments on my Facebook page about Connor's death, saying things like praying for his real family during this difficult time. Someone created a fake email account and sent messages to Connor's former coworkers claiming I'd stolen money from Connor while he was sick. I reported it, but the damage was done. I also discovered that Lorraine had been calling Connor's friends telling them I'd refused to let her see Connor during his final days. This was completely false. They'd visited constantly. But some people believed her. One of Connor's college friends called me and asked why I kept Connor's family away. I explained what really happened. He apologized, but I could tell he was uncertain. Richard said this kind of campaign was meant to isolate me and build their narrative of undue influence. He said we should document everything and potentially file a defamation claim. But I didn't have the energy or money for another lawsuit. I just wanted this to be over. Final update, 4 months later. The will contest was resolved last week and I can finally close this chapter of my life. The past 4 months have been the hardest of my life, worse in some ways than watching Connor die because at least then I had him. Now I've been completely alone fighting people who should have supported me. After my last update, the legal battle continued. Richard and I prepared for the hearing. We gathered evidence, took depositions, built our case. Dennis and Lorraine's attorney deposed me for 6 hours, asking invasive questions about my marriage, my finances, my relationship with Connor's family. They tried to make it seem like I'd married Connor for money, that I'd isolated him from his parents, that I'd manipulated him when he was vulnerable. I answered every question honestly. Richard had prepared me well. They also deposed Connor's oncologist, his hospice nurses, and Richard himself. Every single one of them testified that Connor was mentally competent when he made his will, that there was no evidence of undue influence, that I had been a devoted caregiver. We also had the video Connor recorded. Watching it during the deposition was devastating, seeing him so weak but so determined to protect me. The opposing attorney tried to argue the video was coerced, that I'd manipulated Connor into making it. But you could see in Connor's eyes that he meant every word. There was no confusion or hesitation. In February we had the actual hearing. It lasted 2 days. Dennis and Lorraine testified that I'd prevented them from visiting Connor, that I'd made medical decisions without consulting them, that Connor had expressed doubts about the will to them. All lies. Richard cross-examined them and got Lorraine to admit that she'd visited Connor at least twice a week throughout his illness, that she'd been present for major medical decisions, that Connor had never once told her he regretted his will. He also introduced phone records showing frequent calls between Connor and his parents, proving I hadn't isolated him. Trevor testified that Connor had seemed confused in his final months, that he'd said things that didn't make sense. Richard countered with medical records showing Connor's cognitive function was normal until 2 weeks before his death, long after the will was signed. The judge asked Trevor to provide specific examples of Connor's confusion. Trevor couldn't. On the second day I testified. I explained my relationship with Connor, how we'd met, our marriage, his diagnosis, his treatment. I described how involved his family had been, how I'd welcomed their visits and support. I explained that Connor had made his own decision about the will, that we'd discussed it together, that he'd wanted to ensure I was financially secure. I also submitted text messages between Connor and me where he explicitly talked about his wishes, messages that showed his clear thinking. The opposing attorney tried to rattle me, asking if I'd already started dating, if I planned to sell the house and move on. I said no to both, that I was still grieving my husband and had no plans beyond surviving this ordeal. After both sides rested, the judge said she'd issue a ruling within 30 days. Those 30 days were agonizing. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus at work. I kept replaying the hearing in my mind. Richard said he felt good about our case but that you never know with judges. 3 weeks ago I got the call from Richard. The judge had ruled in my favor. She found no evidence of undue influence or lack of capacity. She validated Connor's will in its entirety. She also ordered Dennis and Lorraine to pay my attorney fees, which had reached $43,000. Richard said the fee award was significant, that judges don't usually order that unless the contest was particularly baseless. I cried on the phone, partly from relief and partly from exhaustion. The ruling meant the estate freeze was lifted. I could finally access Connor's life insurance and retirement accounts. I immediately paid off the medical bills and the mortgage. Paying off the house meant I'd never have to worry about losing the home Connor and I built together. I also paid Richard's fees, sent thank you gifts to Connor's oncologist and hospice team who testified on my behalf. Dennis and Lorraine's attorney filed a notice of appeal. Richard said they had 30 days to actually file the appeal, but that it was likely just posturing. Sure enough, 2 weeks ago their attorney withdrew the appeal notice. Richard said they probably realized they had no grounds and didn't want to incur more legal fees. It's finally over. I haven't heard from Dennis, Lorraine, or Trevor since the ruling. Part of me is sad about that. They're my only connection to Connor's family history, but I also can't forgive what they put me through. Connor has been gone for almost 5 months now. I'm still grieving him every day. I've started seeing a therapist who specializes in grief. She's helping me process not just Connor's death but the betrayal by his family. I've also reconnected with friends I'd neglected during Connor's illness and the legal battle. Bailey is back home with me, having her helps. She still looks for Connor sometimes, and it breaks my heart. I'm trying to figure out what my life looks like now. I'm 34, I'm a widow, I'm alone in a house that feels too big. But I'm also financially secure thanks to Connor's planning. I don't have to worry about money. I can take time to grieve and heal. I've thought about selling the house and starting over somewhere new, but I'm not ready yet. This house has memories of Connor in every room. I'm not ready to let that go. Eventually I'll move forward. I'll build a new life. Maybe I'll meet someone else someday. But for now I'm just taking it one day at a time. I've learned that people will show you who they really are when money is involved, that grief doesn't stop family from being cruel, that you have to protect yourself even when you're at your lowest. Connor tried to protect me with his will and his video, and in the end that was enough. I wish he was here. I wish I didn't have to fight this battle alone. I wish his family had honored his memory instead of attacking me. But I survived it, and that's something.